Hey guys, welcome back to Material UI series. We've got a working application here. You can basically select exercises, you can view details about those exercises, and you can also sort them by different categories. But I think now is a good time to move on to CRUD actions. And the very first action we're going to focus on is the create action. So what I'll do is I'll go to components, exercises, and I'm going to create a new directory. I'm going to call it Dialogs. And let's create our first dialog here. So it's going to be create.js file. Let's import React from React as always, and let's also export default a functional component. It's going to receive props and it's going to return something. For now it's just going to be a div. So the idea for this create dialog is to have sort of like a modal that allows us to create new exercises that we can add to our database. So let's head over to Material UI next. We're going to look at the documentation together. So I'm going to click on get started and let's move on to component demos and let's search for dialogs. Once you go on that page, you can already see quite a few different examples of dialogues that we can use. So for instance, a simple alert dialog would look something like this. When you click on it, you can click away, click on the background, it's going to make the dialog disappear. You can add buttons, we can add all kinds of text and even forms inside of that dialog. And that's exactly what I'd like to do. So one of the examples here actually uses a form nested inside of the dialog. For our application, we're going to have something very similar. We're basically going to have a dialog that contains a form, and the form is going to allow us to enter the title, enter a description, and also select the muscles of the exercise. Once you click on the create button, that's going to create the exercise and basically add it to the database. So let's use this exact example. I'm going to show you the source code. So let's expand that. Let's scroll down and you can see the markup over here already. So you have basically a button that allows you to open the dialog, and then you have the markup for the dialog itself. So this is the markup that we're going to use. I'm just going to copy it over. Let's go back to the application. And let's, instead of the div, let's have a fragment that's going to wrap the button and also wrap the dialog itself. So I'm going to paste the dialog inside, and we're obviously going to need to import all those elements. So I'm just going to grab that import statement. Okay, let's place it like that. The only thing is we're also going to need to import the button. And on the same note, I'm going to move the dialog to this import such that we can have a named import from Material UI. And by the way, what the statement over here does, it basically imports everything from Material UI, but then it only extracts the dialog and the button. So in order to make this import efficient, you would need to enable tree shaking in your setup. We're going to talk about that a little bit later. But for now, we're just going to keep it like that. And if you remember, in one of the previous videos, I also mentioned that there might as well be some breaking changes in the core of the Material UI, such that you won't have to have multiple import statements from different paths, meaning that everything would be available under Material UI. But until then, this is the setup we're going to have to use. So let's leave those import statements alone. We just need to import fragment, of course, from React. So let's have a named import for fragment. And let's see if there's anything else that we need. Actually, I'm going to remove this text field. Let's also indent this because for some reason this has been messed up. In fact, let me change the content text over here. Let's say content. Just going to indent this. Let's see, what else do we have? We have a title. For the title, I think we're just going to say create a new exercise. Okay. And I believe what this element allows us to do is to enter sort of like a description. So we might say something like, please fill out the form below. Okay, and then below it, we're just going to have a form that's going to contain all of the input elements. And for the action buttons, let's actually remove one of them. So we're just going to keep one. I'm going to put create inside of it. I'm going to remove the on-click handler just for now. And the color is going to be primary. So let's save that. And let's not forget to add the button at the top. So I'm going to add a button. So what I'd like to do for this button is to actually have an icon inside of it. So actually, let's go back to the docs. I'm going to go to buttons. And this is the type of button that I'd like to have. So it's going to have a plus icon inside of it. And let's see how this actually works. So you have your button over here. The variant is going to be fab. The color is primary. And then we have the class names, which are optional. But then inside of the button, we actually put the add icon component. And the add icon component, if you look at the import statements, it actually comes from Material UI icons. So we're going to need to import another library here in order to be able to use the icons. Now, if you'd like to learn more about the icons, make sure to click on Style and then go to Icons. And essentially what you're going to find in this section is that they have a couple of different ways to handle icons within the library. So you could use your Material icons from Google, and you basically wrap them with the icon component, and then you put the name of the icon that you like to use. You could also use SVG icons, but more importantly for us, you could also use SVG material icons, and in order to use those, you're going to need to import Material UI icons library. And just very quickly, this Material UI icons library, what it simply does is it takes the Material UI icons developed by Google, and then it wraps them with the SVG icon component so that you're going to be able to use those icons inside of React. So it might sound a little bit complicated, but actually it's not. And the very next thing we're going to do is we're just simply going to import that library. So let's actually find it. Let's add dependency, Material UI icons. Let's make sure we select the latest version, and let's add it now. We're going to wait for the dependencies to build, and then finally, once that's going to be installed, we can just add this import statement at the end so that we can use the add icon. And in fact, for the import statement, you could even change it to something like this. So you can have a named import of add. In this case, you're going to have to change it to add because that's the name of the icon. And you can basically grab it from Material UI icons like that. And like I said, be careful with this approach because you're going to need to enable tree shaking in your project. But now let's grab that add icon and let's also put it inside of the button. And finally, for the button, I'm going to use the variant of fab. So what this is going to do is it's going to make the button rounded, just like this. This is basically the example I'd like to use. And what else do we need? We need the color. Let's set it to primary. So I'll do color. That's going to be primary. And finally, there's also another property called mini. And that property allows you to manipulate the size of the buttons. And you can find it over here. So you could have your small, medium, and large buttons, as well as the mini buttons. They're basically controlled by the mini property. So you can find more over here. Your small, your medium, and your large, as well as your mini button over here. I'm going to go back. Let's save this. And let's actually use the create dialog somewhere. The place that I like to put it in is the app bar. So let's actually go back to the app bar documentation. I believe we use this example over here. So we can essentially place the button right after typography. And if we set flex to 1 on the typography element, that's going to push the button to the far right like that. So instead of the login button, we're going to have the plus icon. That's what we're going to do. So let's grab this create dialog and let's go to the header. I'm actually going to import create dialog from, we're going to need to go up. We're going to go to exercises, dialogs, and then create. Okay. Let's grab the create dialog. Let's also put it at the very end over here. Let's save that. And of course, as you can see here, we get an error. Essentially, the problem here is trying to get the property of open from the state. And we've got a functional component over here. So the one thing we could do is we could, of course, keep the dialog itself separate from the button. And typically, this is what you would do. So the button would be somewhere else, right? And you would have to work out the communication between the button and the dialog through the properties. So sort of like parent-child communication, something that I've explained before in the channel. But the other thing you could do is you could actually change this to a class-based component. And of course, you would need to extend the component that we're going to need to import from React. So let's do that first. Let's import component. And then finally inside, you're going to need to have your render method. You're going to need to return, and then we can just grab the fragment. Okay. And now that we converted this to a stateful component, we can actually start adding the state on the modal or the dialog. So we're going to have state. It's going to be an object. We're going to have an open property. By default, it's going to be false. And then lastly, I'm just going to extract that property from the state. So let's have the open property destructured from state. Okay. And I'm going to change the reference to just the open variable that we just created. And the only thing though is we're going to have to remove the color property because you can almost not see the button. And finally, let's also fix the styling on the typography element. So I'm going to say style, this would be an object, and I'm going to say flex equals 1. And this is going to push the button to the far right, like I said. Finally, in order to make the button actually work, we're going to need to add some kind of behavior to it. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to add an on-click handler. I'm going to call it handle toggle. Let's create this method, handle toggle. We're going to need to have a function that's going to set the state. So let's do exactly that. We're basically just going to set the open property to the exact opposite of its value. So this state open, which is basically going to negate it. And let's see if that works. So I'm going to click on the plus button, and that's going to open the modal. And of course, the one thing that we are actually missing at this point, if we go back to the dialogs, we actually need to provide another property on the dialog itself. And if you expand the example that we use, it's actually called onClose. So let's not forget to include that property. And the onClose, for now, it's referencing the handleClose method that doesn't actually exist. Instead, we're going to use handleToggle. And I'm also going to remove area labeled by, because we don't really care about accessibility for this simple demo. Just going to indent some of the things over here. So we've got the title here, we've got the dialog content. I'm going to fix that. And lastly, the button, and I think it should be fine for now. Let's click on the plus button again. It's going to open the dialog. If you click away, that's going to close it. And finally, I'm also going to add the variant of raised to the button. So now if you click on the plus icon, that's what the button is going to look like.